I watched Marcus tear off the engagement ring from my finger with disgust, his face twisted in revulsion as he threw it onto the cracked linoleum floor of my grandmother's tiny kitchen. I can't believe you lied to me, Elena. All this time, I thought I was marrying into society, not this. His voice dripped with contempt as he gestured around the modest apartment, taking in the faded wallpaper and secondhand furniture that had housed 3 generations of my family's love. The engagement is off, he declared, pulling out his phone to snap photos of the cramped space. My parents need to see what kind of family I almost married into. God, what would people say if they knew the Harrington heir was engaged to someone from the slums? I should have felt devastated. In my previous life, this moment had shattered me so completely that I'd spent months begging him to reconsider, pleading with him to see past my family's financial struggles. But this time, I simply smiled and picked up the ring from the floor, slipping it into my pocket. If that's what you want, Marcus, I won't fight you. He paused, clearly expecting tears and desperate pleas like before. When I remained calm, almost serene, confusion flickered across his handsome features. That's it? You're not going to beg me to stay? Why would I asked, my voice steady. If you can't love me for who I am, then you never really loved me at all. The truth was, I had died 6 months ago in a car accident on the way to our original wedding. An accident that had revealed the true depths of Marcus's shallow, materialistic nature when he'd refused to help pay for my grandmother's medical bills that had bankrupted our family. But somehow, impossibly, I had woken up a year earlier with all my memories intact, given a second chance to see through the golden facade of the man I'd once thought I loved. This time, I knew exactly who Marcus Harrington really was beneath his charming smile and designer suits. Growing up, my family had always been what others would call working poor. My grandmother Rosa had raised me after my parents died in a factory fire when I was 8, working double shifts as a hospital cleaner to keep us afloat. We lived in a rent-controlled apartment in the old part of town, where the elevator sometimes broke and the heat was unreliable in winter. But it was filled with more love and integrity than Marcus's mansion would ever contain. In my previous life, I had been ashamed of my humble beginnings when I'd started dating Marcus during my senior year at the prestigious university I'd attended on full scholarship. He was the golden boy, heir to Harrington Industries, a tech empire worth billions. When he'd pursued me, I'd felt like Cinderella, convinced that love could bridge any gap between our worlds. I had been so wrong. Marcus had never known about my family's financial struggles during our courtship. I had crafted an elaborate fiction, using my scholarship and work-study programs to maintain appearances, always meeting him at upscale locations, wearing carefully chosen outfits from discount stores that looked expensive under restaurant lighting. When he'd proposed, I'd been over the moon, believing that our love was strong enough to weather any storm. The first crack in that illusion had come when my grandmother fell ill with cancer. The medical bills had quickly spiraled beyond anything our meager savings could cover. When I'd finally worked up the courage to ask Marcus for help, not a gift, but a loan that I'd promised to pay back, he'd looked at me as if I'd asked him to rob a bank. Elena, you have to understand, he'd said, his voice taking on that condescending tone I'd learned to dread. I can't just hand out money to every sob story. What would people think if they knew I was supporting some charity case? My reputation, my family's name, it all matters in my world. In my previous life, I'd swallowed that humiliation and found other ways to pay for Grandmother Rosa's treatment, working 3 jobs while planning our wedding. But the stress and exhaustion had taken their toll. I'd started making mistakes. Small ones at first, like falling asleep during his business dinners or showing up to events looking frazzled and tired. Marcus had grown increasingly critical, constantly comparing me to other women in his social circle. Sarah Whitmore always looks so put together, he'd say, or Jennifer's family has such class. Her father owns half of downtown. Each comment had been a small cut, death by 1,000 paper cuts to my self-esteem. The final straw had come when he'd insisted on meeting my family before the wedding. I had begged him to wait, to let me prepare them, but he'd been adamant. I'm marrying you, Elena. I should know where you come from. When he'd seen our modest apartment, met my grandmother with her calloused hands and working-class accent, witnessed the love but also the poverty that had shaped my life, he'd ended our engagement on the spot, just like he was doing now in this second chance at life. But this time, I was ready. This time, I knew what Marcus didn't, that my grandmother, Rosa, wasn't just a retired hospital cleaner. She was Rosa Delacroix, the estranged daughter of French billionaire Henri Delacroix, who had cut ties with her family 40 years ago when she'd married my grandfather, a common American factory worker her father had deemed beneath their family's standards. My grandmother had chosen love over money, just as I had tried to do. But unlike my naive younger self, she had always known exactly what she was walking away from. In my previous life, I had died never knowing the truth about my family's hidden wealth. It was only in death, in some strange space between worlds, that the full story had been revealed to me. My great-grandfather Henry had been searching for his daughter for decades, filled with regret over the pride that had cost him his only child. When he'd finally tracked her down through private investigators, it had been too late. I was already gone, killed in that car accident while drowning in medical debt that could have been erased with a single phone call. But now I had been given this miraculous second chance, armed with knowledge that would change everything. As I watched Marcus storm out of my grandmother's apartment, already pulling out his phone to call his parents with the devastating news of our broken engagement, I felt a calm satisfaction settle over me. In 3 hours, he would discover exactly what his arrogance and shallow materialism had cost him. But first, I had a phone call to make. I waited until Marcus's car had disappeared around the corner before pulling out my cell phone and dialing the number I had memorized in my previous life. A number I'd found in my grandmother's belongings after her death, when it had been too late to matter. Delacroix Industries, how may I direct your call? I need to speak with Henri Delacroix, I said, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was about to do. Please tell him his granddaughter, Elena, is calling. The pause on the other end of the line stretched for several heartbeats. One moment, please. I had expected to be transferred to an assistant, maybe asked to provide proof of my identity. Instead, an elderly voice came on the line, speaking with a faint French accent that I recognized from old recordings I'd found in my grandmother's things. Elena? The word was barely a whisper, filled with decades of hope and regret. My child, is it truly you? Hello, grand-père, I said, using the French endearment my grandmother had taught me as a child, never explaining why. I think it's time we met. The conversation that followed was surreal and emotional. My great-grandfather wept openly as I told him about my grandmother's life, her struggles, her strength, and her illness. I explained how she had raised me with stories of France and family traditions she'd claimed were just folklore, never revealing that they were memories of her privileged childhood. She was so proud, Henri said, his voice thick with emotion. Even as a child, Rosa was too proud to admit when she was wrong. But I was wrong too, Elena. I was a foolish old man who let pride cost me my daughter. I have been searching for her for 20 years, hoping to make amends. She's still alive, grand-père, I said gently. She's sick, but she's still here. And she's going to be so happy to see you. What followed was a whirlwind that Marcus, in his arrogance, never saw coming. Within 2 hours, a private jet had landed at the local airport. My great-grandfather, Henri Delacroix, a man worth approximately $15 billion and owner of one of Europe's largest luxury conglomerates, had flown directly from Paris the moment he'd hung up the phone. The reunion between my grandmother and her father was everything I had hoped it would be. 40 years of hurt and pride melted away as she fell into his arms, both of them crying as they spoke in rapid French, apologizing and forgiving in the same breath. My Rosa, Henri whispered, cupping her face in his weathered hands. My beautiful daughter, I am so sorry. I am so very sorry. Papa, she whispered back, using the childhood name she hadn't spoken in 4 decades. I missed you every day. As they reconnected, Henri quietly made arrangements for my grandmother's medical care. The best oncologists in the world were consulted via video conference. A treatment plan was developed that would give her not just hope, but the highest probability of a full recovery. Money that had seemed impossibly out of reach in my previous life was now a non-issue, a simple matter of Henri writing a check. But that was just the beginning. Elena, my great-grandfather said, as we sat in my grandmother's living room, a space that suddenly felt different now that I knew our true family history. There are things you must know about your inheritance. It turned out that my grandmother had never been officially disinherited. In French law, and according to the Delacroix family trust, she remained Henri's heir regardless of their estrangement, which meant that I, as her only grandchild, was in line to inherit not just money, but control of an empire that spanned luxury goods, real estate, technology, and investments across 3 continents. Of course, there will be legal processes to formalize everything, Henri explained. But as of today, you are the Delacroix heir. The family lawyers are already preparing the documentation. The irony was almost too perfect. Marcus had broken our engagement because he thought I was too poor, too common, too beneath his social status. In reality, my family's wealth dwarfed his by a factor of nearly 10, but I wasn't done with my revenge yet. That evening, as my great-grandfather's security team discreetly positioned themselves around our building, and his personal physician attended to my grandmother, I called Marcus. He answered on the first ring, his voice still filled with smug satisfaction. Elena, look, I hope you understand that I had to do what was best for both of us. You'll thank me someday when you realize how incompatible we really were. Actually, Marcus, I called to thank you now, I said, letting genuine warmth creep into my voice. You were absolutely right to end our engagement. The confusion in his voice was palpable. I was? Of course, I realized today that I've been living a lie, pretending to be someone I'm not. You deserve to be with someone who's honest about who they are and where they come from. Well, Marcus said, clearly pleased with himself. I'm glad you're being mature about this, Elena. It shows character. It does, doesn't it? I agreed. In fact, I'm so grateful for your honesty that I want to give you something, a token of my appreciation for showing me your true nature. I could practically hear him preening through the phone. That's very generous of you, Elena, but it's not necessary. Oh, but I insist. You see, I'm having a little gathering tomorrow evening. Nothing fancy, just some family and friends. I'd love for you to come and meet some of the people who are important to me. People I've been hiding from you. The pause was telling. I could almost hear the wheels turning in his head as he tried to figure out what angle I was playing. Elena, I don't think that's a good idea. We've broken up. It might send the wrong message if I... Please, Marcus, I interrupted, letting a note of vulnerability creep into my voice. I know we're not engaged anymore, but we were together for 2 years. Surely we can part as friends. Besides, there are some people I'd really like you to meet. People who can help you understand why I am the way I am. His curiosity won out over his caution, just as I'd known it would. Marcus had always been unable to resist any situation where he might gain some advantage or insight he could use later. All right, he said finally, but just for an hour or so. I don't want to give you false hope about us getting back together. Of course not, I assured him. 7 o'clock tomorrow night. Oh, and Marcus, bring your parents. I think they'd really enjoy meeting my family. After I hung up, my grandmother looked at me with eyes that sparkled with mischief. Eyes that I now realized I had inherited from the Delacroix line. Ma petite, she said in the French endearment she'd used throughout my childhood. What are you planning? I smiled, feeling the satisfaction of a plan perfectly set in motion. Just giving Marcus exactly what he asked for, Grandmère. A chance to meet the real me. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of activity. Henri's team worked with quiet efficiency to transform my grandmother's modest apartment building into something that would serve our purposes. Not by changing anything obvious, the beauty of the plan required that everything look exactly the same as when Marcus had seen it. But what Marcus didn't know was that the modest apartment building my grandmother lived in was actually a piece of prime real estate in the old historic district, one of the most sought-after neighborhoods in the city. The building itself was small and unassuming, but the land it sat on was worth millions. And as of that morning, thanks to a quick purchase through one of Henri's shell companies, my grandmother now owned not just her apartment, but the entire building and the 2 adjacent properties. More importantly, Henri had made some phone calls. Elena, he said, as his team finished setting up discreet security cameras and audio equipment throughout the building. I want you to understand something about power. Real power isn't just about money, though we have plenty of that. Real power is about connections, relationships, the ability to make things happen with a phone call. He handed me a tablet displaying a series of news articles and stock reports. Your Marcus's family, the Harringtons. They think they're powerful because they have some money and a successful business. But they are, how do you say, small fish in a very big pond. I scrolled through the information, my eyes widening as I saw the connections Henry had mapped out. Harrington Industries' biggest contracts were with companies that Henry either owned outright or held controlling interests in. Their primary investors, their key suppliers, even the bank that held their corporate credit lines, all of them were part of the vast web of the Delacroix empire. They don't even know it, Henri continued with satisfaction. They think they built their success independently. But for the past 15 years, every major deal they've made, every crucial contract that built their fortune, it all flowed through companies I control. I could have crushed them at any time. Why didn't you? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. His smile was sharp and calculating. Because I had no reason to. They were useful to me, a small cog in a larger machine, generating modest profits while serving my purposes. But now, he gestured toward the preparations around us. Now they have insulted my family. They have shown disrespect to my granddaughter. That changes everything. As evening approached, I dressed carefully in a simple but elegant dress, one that Henri's personal shopper had procured for me that afternoon. It was designer, though nothing flashy, and it fit me perfectly. I wanted to look beautiful, but not obviously wealthy. The contrast needed to be subtle until the right moment. My grandmother, now glowing with health thanks to a full day of the best medical care money could buy, wore a vintage Chanel dress that she'd kept carefully preserved in her closet for 40 years, a remnant from her privileged youth that I'd never understood the significance of until now. Henri himself remained out of sight, positioned in the apartment next door with a full view of the proceedings through the discreet cameras his team had installed. He would make his entrance when the time was right. Marcus arrived precisely at 7, dressed in his most expensive suit and accompanied by his parents, Robert and Patricia Harrington. I could see the distaste on their faces as they climbed the narrow staircase to my grandmother's floor, their designer shoes clicking against the worn steps. "Elena," Patricia said with false warmth as I opened the door. "How quaint. This is where you grew up." "It is," I said with genuine warmth. "Please, come in and meet my grandmother." I watched as the three Harringtons took in the modest apartment with barely concealed horror. The furniture was clean and well-maintained, but clearly secondhand. The walls were decorated with family photos and small mementos, rather than expensive art. Everything about the space screamed working class to their judgmental eyes. "Mrs. Delacroix," Marcus said with stiff politeness as my grandmother rose to greet them. "It's nice to finally meet you." "Please," my grandmother said with the grace that I now understood came from a lifetime of training in European etiquette. "Call me Rosa, and thank you for coming. Elena has told me so much about your family." Robert Harrington barely glanced at her as he examined the apartment. "Yes, well, we thought it was important to understand Elena's background before Marcus made any permanent decisions." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable, and I saw my grandmother's eyes flash with something that might have been anger, if she hadn't been enjoying herself so much. "Of course," she said smoothly. "Family background is so important, don't you think? Elena, perhaps you should tell them about our family history." This was my cue. "Actually," I said, moving to stand beside my grandmother, "I think it would be better if I showed them." I pulled out my phone and opened the video call app, connecting to the number Henri had given me. Within seconds, my great-grandfather's face appeared on the screen, sitting in what was clearly an elegantly appointed office. "Bonsoir, ma chère Elena," he said warmly, his accent lending sophistication to every word. "Are these the people you wanted me to meet?" The Harringtons froze as they heard the French accent, their eyes fixed on the obvious luxury visible in the background of the video call. "Yes, grand-père," I said in French, knowing that all three Harringtons spoke the language, but wanting to establish the connection clearly. "Grand-père, I'd like you to meet Marcus Harrington and his parents, Robert and Patricia. They're the ones I told you about." Henri's expression shifted subtly, his businessman's smile becoming something cooler and more assessing. "Ah, Les Harringtons. Yes, I know this family. We have done business together, though I suspect they do not realize it. Marcus stepped closer to the phone, his face pale. I'm sorry. Who exactly are you? My apologies, Henri said with the kind of politeness that only comes from generations of aristocratic breeding. I am Henri Delacroix. Elena is my great-granddaughter. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the wheels turning in Robert Harrington's head as he tried to place the name, while Patricia's face had gone completely white. Delacroix, Robert repeated slowly. As in Delacroix Industries? The same, Henri confirmed, though I believe you know us better through our subsidiary companies. Harrington Industries has been quite dependent on our contracts over the years. It was Marcus who spoke first, his voice cracking slightly. Elena, what is this? What's going on? I looked at him with the calm, centered confidence that came from finally knowing exactly who I was and what I was worth. This is me being honest, Marcus, I said. You said you wanted to know where I came from, who my family really is. Well, this is my family. But, Patricia stammered, gesturing around the modest apartment. This place, the way you live? My grandmother chose love over money 40 years ago, I explained. She was disowned when she married my grandfather, a man her father considered beneath their family's station. She's lived modestly ever since, by choice, raising me with the values of hard work and integrity rather than privilege and entitlement. I paused, letting that sink in before delivering the next blow. But that changed yesterday, when Marcus broke our engagement because he decided I wasn't good enough for his family. Robert Harrington's business instincts were finally kicking in, and I could see the horror dawning on his face as he began to understand the magnitude of what had just happened. Elena, he said carefully, I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. Marcus didn't mean— Oh, but he did, I interrupted. He was very clear about his reasons. He said he couldn't marry someone from the slums. He said his reputation and his family's name were too important to risk associating with people like us. I pulled out my phone again, this time opening the voice recording app where I'd saved Marcus's words from the day before. Let me play you exactly what he said. Marcus's own voice filled the room, crystal clear and damning. I can't believe you lied to me, Elena. All this time, I thought I was marrying into society, not this. God, what would people say if they knew the Harrington heir was engaged to someone from the slums? The silence that followed was broken only by Henry's voice from the video call. Interesting, he said, his tone ice cold. So this is the character of the Harrington family. They judge people by their postcodes rather than their worth. Mr. Delacroix, Robert began desperately, please understand Marcus is young. He spoke rashly. No, Henry cut him off. He spoke honestly. And honesty, Monsieur Harrington, is something I value greatly. Your son has shown me exactly who he is, and by extension, what your family represents. He paused, and I could see him looking at something off camera before continuing. I have here a list of contracts that Harrington Industries currently holds with various companies in my portfolio. The total value is approximately $2.8 billion over the next 5 years. These contracts represent roughly 60% of your company's projected revenue. Robert's face had gone ashen. Mr. Delacroix, please, let's not make any hasty decisions. Hasty? Henri's eyebrows rose. Monsieur, I am 84 years old. I have not made a hasty decision in decades. This is not hasty. This is justice. He looked directly into the camera, speaking to me but ensuring the Harringtons could hear every word. Elena, ma chère, I want you to know that your family will never again be disrespected by people who mistake money for worth or arrogance for breeding. The Harrington family has shown us who they truly are, and we should believe them. Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Elena, please, you have to understand. I understand perfectly, I said, my voice steady and calm. I understand that you never loved me, Marcus. You loved the idea of me, the pretty scholarship girl who made you feel magnanimous and generous. But the moment you discovered that I came from humble beginnings, that I had struggles and problems and family who weren't rich enough to benefit you, you couldn't get away fast enough. I walked to the window, looking out at the street where Henry's security team was discreetly positioned, before turning back to face him. You know what the truly ironic part is? If you had loved me for who I am, If you had shown respect for my grandmother and the sacrifices she made to raise me, you would have gained not just a wife, but a family that could have lifted the Harrington name to heights you never imagined. Patricia was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks as she realized the full scope of what her son's arrogance had cost them. But instead, I continued, you chose to show your true character, and now everyone will see exactly what that character is worth. Henri's voice came through the phone again, businesslike and final. Robert, you will receive formal notice tomorrow morning that all contracts between Delacroix portfolio companies and Harrington Industries are terminated, effective immediately. Our legal department is preparing the documentation as we speak. You can't do this, Robert protested. We have binding contracts, legal obligations, which include morality clauses and reputation protection standards that your family has just violated. Henri replied smoothly. My lawyers assure me that the terminations will be entirely legal and enforceable. He paused, letting the full weight of that settle before continuing. Furthermore, I have contacted several colleagues in various industries. Word of your family's character will spread quickly through the appropriate channels. I suspect you will find future business relationships somewhat more challenging to establish. Marcus was staring at me with a mixture of horror and desperate calculation. Elena, wait, he said suddenly. I made a mistake, okay? I was wrong. We can fix this. We can get back together. Make this right. No, Marcus, I said firmly. We can't. Because this isn't about money or contracts or business deals. This is about who you are as a person. And you've shown me exactly who that is. I walked over to where he stood and pulled the engagement ring from my pocket. The ring he had thrown on my grandmother's floor in disgust just 24 hours earlier. You said you couldn't marry someone from the slums, I said, holding the ring out to him. Well, I can't marry someone who would judge a person's worth by their bank account instead of their character. He stared at the ring, but made no move to take it. Besides, I added with a smile that I'm sure looked perfectly innocent, I think I can do better. As if on cue, the apartment door opened and Henry entered, flanked by two impeccably dressed men who were clearly his security detail. Despite being 84, my great-grandfather carried himself with the kind of presence that only comes from a lifetime of wielding real power. Elena, he said warmly, crossing the room to embrace me, ma petite fille. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than the Harringtons spent on clothing in a year. And the watch on his wrist was a vintage Patek Philippe that collectors would kill for. Everything about him radiated wealth, power, and old-world sophistication. Grand-père, I said, accepting his embrace and feeling genuinely emotional at being reunited with family I'd never known I had. I'm so glad you're here. He held me at arm's length, studying my face with eyes that were shrewd and kind in equal measure. You look so much like your grandmother did at your age, he said softly. Beautiful, intelligent, and far too good for men who cannot see your worth. He turned to face the Harringtons, who were standing frozen in shock and growing horror. And you must be the family who decided my great-granddaughter was not good enough for them, he said. His voice pleasant, but with an undertone of steel that made it clear this was not a man to be trifled with. Robert attempted to salvage the situation with desperate diplomacy. Mr. Delacroix, please, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. We had no idea about Elena's family connections. If we had known... but that is precisely the problem, Henry interrupted smoothly. You did not know, and yet you felt qualified to judge. You looked at this apartment, at my daughter Rosa, at the life they have built through honest work and love, and you found it lacking. He gestured around the modest but clean and warm space. Do you know what I see when I look at this place? I see a woman who chose love over money, who raised a granddaughter with more integrity and character than most people learn in a lifetime. I see resilience, strength, and values that no amount of money can buy. Patricia was sobbing openly now while Marcus stood like a statue, his face white with shock. Henri continued, his voice taking on the tone of a man accustomed to delivering final judgments. You, however, saw only poverty to be avoided, associations to be ashamed of, people to be looked down upon. And in doing so, you revealed everything I need to know about your family's character. He pulled out his phone and made a brief call in rapid French. I caught enough to understand that he was instructing his legal team to expedite the contract terminations and to ensure that word of the Harringtons' behavior reached the right people in their social and business circles. When he hung up, he turned back to Robert with the kind of smile that probably preceded many business rivals' downfalls. I have just instructed my team to accelerate our timeline. By tomorrow evening, news of this incident will have reached every major family and business leader in your social circle. The story of how the Harringtons insulted the Delacroix family will be quite the topic of conversation at the country club, I imagine. You're destroying us over a misunderstanding, Patricia cried. No, madam, Henry replied calmly. I am simply allowing your actions to have their natural consequences. You have destroyed yourselves. Marcus finally seemed to find his voice, though it came out strangled and desperate. Elena, please, you have to stop this. We were together for 2 years. What we had was real. I love you. I looked at him for a long moment, remembering the man I had thought I loved, comparing him to the man standing before me now. Marcus, I said gently, if you loved me, you would have loved me yesterday when you thought I was poor. If you loved me, you would have been proud to introduce me to your parents regardless of where I came from. If you loved me, you would have seen my grandmother's strength and dignity instead of just her modest apartment. I took a step closer to him, my voice remaining calm and clear. But you didn't love me. You loved the idea of having a beautiful, grateful wife who would owe her elevation in society to your generosity. You loved feeling superior and magnanimous. You never loved Elena Delacroix. You loved your own reflection in my grateful eyes. The truth of those words hung in the air like a physical presence. Marcus opened his mouth as if to argue, but no words came out. And now, I continued, you don't love me at all. You love what I represent, the connections, the money, the power you think you can access through me. You're not apologizing because you're sorry for hurting me. You're panicking because you've realized what you've lost. Henri nodded approvingly at my assessment. Très bien, ma chère. You understand perfectly. He looked at Marcus with something that might have been pity if it hadn't been so cold. Young man, you had the opportunity to join one of the most powerful families in the world. All you had to do was love my great-granddaughter for who she is, treat her family with respect, and show basic human decency. He shook his head slowly. Instead, you chose arrogance and superficiality. You chose to judge by appearances rather than character, and now you will live with the consequences of that choice. Robert made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Mr. Delacroix, surely we can work something out. Marcus is young, he made a mistake. Perhaps some kind of arrangement. An arrangement? Henri's voice was dangerously quiet. You think this is a business negotiation? You think you can buy your way out of showing disrespect to my family? He walked closer to Robert, and despite the difference in their ages, there was no question about which man held the power in that room. Let me explain something to you, Monsieur Harrington. I have spent 60 years building relationships, earning respect, and creating a legacy that will outlast my lifetime. Do you think I would compromise any of that to save a family that has shown such poor judgment and worse character? The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable, broken only by Patricia's quiet sobbing. Finally, Henri turned back to me and my grandmother, his expression softening immediately. Rosa, ma fille, I think it is time we left this place and went home. Home? My grandmother asked, though there was hope in her voice. The family estate in Provence has been waiting for you for 40 years, Henri said gently, and I have a granddaughter to spoil and introduce to society properly. He looked at me with eyes that sparkled with plans and possibilities. Elena, I hope you are prepared for some changes in your life. You have a family empire to learn about, social connections to make, and a future to build that will be worthy of your character and intelligence. I felt a surge of excitement mixed with trepidation. What about school, my job? Henri waved dismissively. You will finish your education, of course, but at the Sorbonne in Paris, studying international business and law. As for employment, you have an empire to run, ma chère. The Delacroix legacy will be yours to shape. As the full scope of my new reality began to sink in, I turned to look at the Harringtons one last time. Marcus was staring at me with a mixture of longing and horror, finally understanding the magnitude of what he had thrown away. His parents looked like they had aged a decade in the past hour. You know, I said thoughtfully, in a way, I should thank you, Marcus. If you hadn't shown me your true character, I might have made the terrible mistake of marrying you. I might have spent my life trying to be someone I'm not, trying to earn acceptance from people whose approval isn't worth having.